really great, incredible speaker. Back when we had the shootings at the Jewish Community Center, I felt compelled to seek out some interfaith connections and went to something called Vital Conversations, which is led by our speaker today, David Nelson. And not only are they a really incredible group, they're very welcoming to me, and he himself has been very supportive of what we're doing here. He is one of the original founders of the Greater Kansas City Interfaith Council. He's a facilitator of Vital Conversations, which happens every month. And he actually is a retired pastor from the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, now serves as an associate minister for the Center for Religious Experience and Study. And he has some really great content for us to talk about. Our Vital Conversations, the sheets on your seat are relevant to what he's talking about today. I know I'm bringing a pastor up to the front of a secular organization, and I love it. So he's perfect for this, though, so I hope everyone give him a really great, warm welcome.
I think this comes out so I can carry it. Amanda, thank you. I really needed that this week after the death of our friend Robin Williams, and I feel like I understand him a little more. I appreciate it, and my hug's at a distance now, but if you're around when I'm finished, I would like to close the gap. What an amazing group. When I first met your organizer, and she was talking about this, and then she called and asked if I would come and speak. I agreed. I thought that was kind of exciting. And then Time magazine comes out where you're featured in a national magazine, and I thought, man, I must be a rock star. I get to be with this group today. I am honored to be in your presence. And what I would really like is to have a one-on-one conversation with everybody here, to ask you what's going on really good in your life. What is it that makes you the person that you are and helps you to live with the integrity with which you live. But I don't have the time to do that with each one, but I want to tell you a little bit about something significant that I think is meaningful for all of us. And I want to start by telling you the story of Marvin and Lincoln. Marvin and Lincoln had never met before the very last few weeks of 7th grade. Marvin had lived in town all of his life. He was very respected by all of the other students. His parents were leaders in the community. His dad was one of these guys that knew everybody and was always networking people, and everybody thought he was really a pretty special guy. Marvin was an exceptional student, and on a Friday, just before a class was dismissed, the teacher asked Marvin if he would stay after school, because she had a favor to ask him. And so he said, sure. And she said, Marvin, we're going to get a new student on Monday. His name is Lincoln. And I would like for you to be his friend. I'm a little worried that Lincoln may not feel totally welcomed here. But all the other students really respect you. And if you welcome him, they'll welcome him too. Would you do that? And you know how when somebody asks you to do something, you stand a little taller? And Marvin said, I would be glad to do that. I would be glad to do that. So Marvin and Lincoln met on Monday morning. They were assigned seats next to each other. They played in PE. After 2 days, they realized they could walk to school together. And they started developing this incredible friendship. Both of them found in the other kind of a special relationship. You've had that in your life, a special person that, for whatever reason, seemed to make you feel better about yourself and better about the world. They became so attached that they decided to plan their summer together. They were on a scout group that went for some overnight campouts. They were on a swim team and taking swimming lessons together. However, the first time that Lincoln spent the night at Marvin's house, after breakfast, when Lincoln left to walk home, Marvin's father pulled Marvin aside. And he said, Marvin, some things you just got to trust your old man about. I know people, and Lincoln is bad blood. Lincoln is going to get you into trouble. I want you to spend less time with Lincoln and broaden the circle of your friendships. Well, maybe you, like I, have that forbidden fruit that tastes even sweeter. Lincoln and Marvin were even more drawn to each other, but now they had to be somewhat clandestine about their friendship. And unfortunately, they became involved with some older boys, and about 3 weeks into summer, on a Friday night, they were arrested, along with some older boys, for breaking into a store downtown. The police chief did not want to charge these kids. They seemed so young. And so he made a decision not to charge them that night, but to contact a parent and then have them come back at 10 o'clock Saturday morning to meet with the county attorney to decide what to do with these 2 young boys. So the police captain made a couple of phone calls, and Marvin's father was the first to arrive at the police station. He came in and he greeted everybody. Marlis, how are things going? It's good to see you again. Gosh, Michael, haven't seen you before, but how are you? You know, greeted everybody. How's your mom doing? I understand she's been sick. He was one of these guys that just knew everybody. He built his whole world around all these people. Then he signed the paper, said, I'll have Marvin back at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Grabbed Marvin by the collar and walked him out to the car, put him in the back seat. They drove home, told him to sit down at the kitchen table. He sat down across from him. Marvin's mom, his wife, sat next to him. Finally, Marvin's dad leaned across the table and said, Marvin, you disgust me. What a stupid thing you did tonight. You know better than that, young man. Your mother and I have given you some good values in your life. This doesn't represent this family. You are an embarrassment. Don't you realize that my respect in this town, my business is dependent on the respect of all the other people? And you have ruined that by your stupid behavior. And I know it's not you, Marvin, because you're a good kid. I warned you, it's that Lincoln kid. He's the reason you got into trouble. I don't know what my friend, the county attorney, is going to say tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, but let me make a couple of things very clear to you, young man. You are an embarrassment to this family. You are grounded for the summer. Don't even think about getting any privileges. And you listen to this clearly. You will not, I repeat, not hang out with Lincoln and his kind. They're bad blood. They're going to get you into trouble. They don't have the values that I've instilled in you. Marvin, you disgust me. I don't even want to look at you. Go to your room. Marvin walked to his room and later that night fell asleep with tears on his pillow. Shortly after Marvin and his father left, Lincoln's mother came in. She hugged Lincoln and he hugged her back and said, I'm really sorry, Mom. She said, I'm sorry too, son. She filled out the paper, said that they would have him back at 10 o'clock the next morning. They went out and sat in the front seat of the car in the parking lot. Finally, she said, you know, son, I think it's probably best if we go back to grandfather's house. And Lincoln said, I think that's a good idea, Mom. And so they picked up his younger sister, Lincoln's little sister, and the 3 of them drove the 49 miles across the state line to the Pine Ridge Reservation, where they had lived up until about a month and a half before. There weren't many words exchanged in the car ride. The Lakota Sioux, as well as other First Nation people, oftentimes operate under the dictum, speak only when your words will improve upon the silence. They got to grandfather's house and told grandfather what happened, and grandfather said, I'm so sorry, son, and gave him a hug. He made a couple of phone calls, and after about 45 minutes, he said, it's time. And so the 4 of them, grandfather, Lincoln, his little sister, and his mother, walked about 4 blocks to the tribal council building. It was a room about the size of this room. Same kind of floor, no furniture in the room. As each person came in and greeted grandfather, they would take a chair. Pretty soon, there was a circle with about 35 chairs, and they put one chair right in the middle. Lincoln had never been to a gathering like this, but he knew this gathering was about him, and he was getting pretty nervous by the time grandfather said, Lincoln, please be seated. And Lincoln sat down. And what seemed like a lifetime was only a couple of minutes, but everybody sat in silence. And finally, grandfather stood up. The elder speaks first in that culture. And he literally walked up, got down on his knees so that he could look right into his grandson's eyes. And he said, "Lincoln, you won't remember this, but the day you were born was the happiest day of my life. Your parents so wanted a child, and it was not easy for them. But the day you were born, our whole family celebrated. I think all our relatives celebrated. I think the four-legged in the forest were happier. I think that was the brightest full moon I've ever seen. I think our winged brothers and sisters were more joyous. And even the smell of the plants was more beautiful to smell. All of creation celebrated your birth. You were such a gift to the family. And you will remember this, Lincoln. You were 3 or 4 years old, and it was the first time that just the two of us went fishing. We walked through the cemetery and above over the ridge into the pond. You hooked into a fish in the pond and fought it for a while, and you thought it was going to be the biggest fish ever caught on the reservation. And then you not only dropped your fishing pole, you kicked my tackle box into the pond as well. Boy, we had fun that night, that day. He told several other stories of things he appreciated about Lincoln, and finally he sat down. There was another period of silence. And then another person around the circle got up. And he walked up and he stood in front of Lincoln, and he told about a story from Lincoln's childhood, some value that he had and that he had demonstrated. Some story about something they really appreciated about him. As the evening progressed, every person in the circle had at least one story of something they appreciated about Lincoln. Not one person told a lie. In fact, quite a few of them pointed out that there would be consequences for his behavior. But everybody had at least one story of something they appreciated about him. One of the highlights of the evening is when his little sister got up. She wasn't used to being in a kind of a powerful relationship looking down at her big brother, but she strutted around a little bit before she stopped in front of him. Finally she stopped and she said, "You know, Lincoln, you and I have had our difficulties, but the last week of school, when some of the kids were making fun of me, the way I was dressed and the way I'd worn my hair that day, and you stood next to me, and you said to that group of kids, 'This is my little sister, and she is a beautiful young woman, and she will dress and wear her hair any way she chooses.' Lincoln, I felt like I was 10 feet tall and nothing could ever knock me down again. I love you, Lincoln. I am so glad that you're my brother." It was an amazing evening, an amazing evening. After several hours, quite a bit of silence, Grandfather finally stood up and said, "Thank you all for coming." And everybody got up, put their chairs away, and started walking home. On the walk home, Lincoln said to his mom, "I wish that I could spend the night here, and then we'll drive back in the morning." And his mom agreed. So Lincoln slept that night on the couch in his grandfather's house, and he fell asleep that night with tears on his pillow. But the nature of those tears was dramatically different than the tears that his best friend Marvin was crying that night. That's a true story. Amanda, you're from South Dakota. Have you ever been to Pine Ridge? Yeah. I want you to turn to somebody, preferably not your life partner or a bandmate, but turn to somebody and just share a few thoughts. I'm not going to give you much time, but just a few thoughts on what's the difference between what happened to Marvin that night and what happened to Lincoln. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes, and then I want to hear some out loud. So just turn to somebody. What's the difference between what happened to Marvin and what happened to Lincoln? Not talking. I spend much of my professional life trying to get people to talk and to listen to each other, and then I end up interrupting them, and I do apologize for that. Let's hear a few of the things. What's the difference between what happened to Marvin and what happened to Lincoln? Yes.
With Marvin, he was really like shamed and guilted, and he sat and reflected on his own wrongdoing. And with Lincoln, they taught him what he did well, and he was able to say, I'm able to do all of this good. Why did I make this bad decision? So in the end, it was like Lincoln was brought up, while Marvin was really brought down.
Wow, beautiful, Crystal. And you know, you use the word shame. Marvin was shamed. Lincoln felt guilt. Shame is, I am not good, and no one should be shamed. Guilt is the appropriate response when you do something wrong, and we've all done something wrong. Yes?
Yeah, with Marvin, they pointed out all the bad things about him, all the negative things, all the things that would make him feel bad about what he did. Where with Lincoln, they pointed out all the great things about him and why that what he did was not who he is.
That's right. That's right.
They created this positive image of him that he wasn't needing, but it was a positive way that he would be able to strive to be that positive aspect of himself. Or with Marvin, it was they were planting these pregnancies.
Yep. With Marvin, who's a good kid, one stupid behavior, father's focusing all the attention on that behavior. With Lincoln, they're reminding him of this wonderful life he's lived, and what a beautiful person and what a gift he is to the community. What else? Yes?
Marvin's father was more concerned with appearances.
Yes.
And
spoken as a good dear parrot, David.
and Lincoln's situation, they were more concerned with who and what Lincoln was.
Yes. Marvin's father was concerned, what's this going to do to my reputation? And focused, isolated Marvin. Lincoln's family expanded, brought extra people in, and built him up. Anything else? Yes?
The difference between two of them going to bed that night, one was totally rejected, and the other one was totally accepted.
Totally rejected, totally accepted. Same exact behavior. One is totally accepted, one is totally rejected. There are many other things about that story we can talk about. I share that story because it's one of the best stories that I've ever known, that is a reminder how every single incident, everything that happens in our life can be seen from such different perspectives. On the one hand, both boys participated in the same act, but at 10 o'clock the next morning, think of the difference between Marvin walking in, being told by he could no longer be with his best friend. He is an embarrassment to the two people that should love him the most. He is isolated, he is shamed. Lincoln going in the next morning and knows that whatever he's going to face at 10 o'clock, he's got a whole circle of friends supporting him. And that he wants to live up to their expectations of him. It's a very good example of an alternative way of thinking. It's as old as Native American and original communities of human beings. But I think we need to re-embrace it today. And the little bit I've gotten to know Helen, and the little bit that I've seen on the website and read in Time magazine, and some interactions with some of you, I think you are models of appreciative inquiry. Appreciative inquiry, to simplify it, instead of looking at what's wrong with an organization and trying to fix it, or looking at what's wrong with a person and trying to fix it. Appreciative inquiry looks at what's right with a person or an organization, identifies it, celebrates it, grows it, and expands it. I'm an appreciative inquiry coach, and so as I work with human beings and as I work with human organizations, I not only teach appreciative inquiry, but I try to practice it in my life. I want to share with you the 8 assumptions of appreciative inquiry. They're on the sheet that was in your chair when you sat down. An assumption is like a pair of glasses that you put on. My 69-year-old eyes can't read too much without these glasses. The glasses of appreciative inquiry change what I see. They may not be any more accurate than another assumption, but it changes who I am when I use it. Let me illustrate. The first assumption of appreciative inquiry is that in every organization, every human being, something works. Now, it's just as accurate to say in every human being, in every organization, something doesn't work. Both of those statements are equally true. But when I go into work with a team, or I go to work with an organization, or I work with a board of directors, and I have on the lenses that I'm looking for what's wrong and how I can fix it, I will see something different than if I go in and say something in this group works. Because number two, what you pay attention to becomes your reality. What you focus on becomes your reality. What we pay attention to, the kind of community we're building here, the sharing and the openness and the trust that we build here, we pay attention to that, that becomes our reality. I can look at the institutional church because I was a part of it for the first half of my adult life. And there are many things about it that I'm pretty clear about, pretty sad sometimes and pretty distorted. But I can also say that some things within institutional churches and synagogues and pagodas and groups work. That's why I work with the Kansas City Interfaith Council to try to build greater cooperation. There are some things in the St. Louis community in Ferguson that are very, very broken. But there's also some things that are there that are working. And as you listen to and read the stories about our neighbors, I think we should look for what's working. On 9/11, there were some things that were revealed. For many people, we really didn't know much about Islam. We didn't know many Muslims. And for some people, ever since then, we've been paying attention to a very, very small minority of Muslims who do not represent one of the great faiths of our land, of our peoples, of our planet. What we pay attention to becomes our reality. I teach appreciative parenting, and one of the things I say to parents several times during the classes is appreciative parenting, the basic is very simple. You pay as much attention as utterly possible to the behaviors you would like to see more of, and you pay as little attention as you can get away with to behaviors you'd like to see less of. And when I first say that, I see terror go up the face of these people. And I realize it myself. My son comes home from high school, and is a junior in high school with all A's and B's, except one C minus. Where does Dad go? To the C minus. The C minus was in a math subject. Lars is now building $4 million homes in Yellowstone and in Bozeman, Montana. He knows enough math. But I didn't ask about one of those A's in the class, was about human problems or human community. And he was a real gift to that class, and I wish I would have paid attention to that. Number three is that reality is created in the moment, and there are always multiple realities. There's probably 60 people in this room. That means that there are probably 120 realities going on. Most of us can carry a couple of realities at the same time. I see my brother back here thinking about the Chiefs tonight. We hope that they can keep looking pretty good. Some of you have the reality, gosh, David Nelson's a pretty good storyteller. I'm glad I came this morning. Some of you are still so moved by Amanda's testimony and sharing of her life story that it's kind of hard to make a shift. Some of us are thinking about, there's some awfully good-looking food over here at the bottom. There's always multiple realities. One of the wonderful things about Kansas City Oasis is that we come together because we recognize that we're so different. I love unity in our values, charity in our differences. Of course we are different. If there's anything about the human species, it's that it's diverse. Just look around at these beautiful faces that gather here. Number four, being present to another human being will always have an impact on that human being. Being present to another human being will always have some kind of an impact. When I woke up this morning, I didn't get to decide, will I have an impact on the Davids in there? My choice was, would my impact give life and hope and courage and maybe some new ways of thinking? Or will my impact be like Marvin's father, reinforcing past hurt and past scars and opening up old wounds and putting salt in them? Number 5 and 6 go together. People have more comfort and courage moving to the unknown, the future, if they can carry with them parts of the past. And if we're going to carry parts of the past, let's make it sure that it's what's good about the past. One of the greatest gifts we can give to each other, whether we're friends, life partners, parents, children, is to help each other discover and tell stories about our past that have really been good, that have really been life-giving, would have helped me feel good about myself. As I tell that story, I begin to get in touch with my positive core, my root cause for success, and I can live out of it even more. Number 7, it's important to value and celebrate differences. Diversity is not the problem to be solved. Diversity is the gift to be celebrated. I would love to have Kansas City Oasis represented at the Greater Kansas City Interfaith Council. I would love to see this community's story told more widely, because Kansas City is a richer community because of you. And I want that to be known, because diversity is our gift to be celebrated. And finally, the language we use creates our reality. The very words that we use create the reality in which we live. I remember hearing as a child that kind of sing-songy phrase, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me." Maybe I've just lived a pretty sheltered life, but I have never been hurt by a stick or a stone like I've been hurt by a word. A word that was shot like a dagger or a bullet. A word that was intended to hurt and to tear me down. Words create, and words can destroy. And so we need to be very careful about the words we use. I appreciate how this community is really concentrating on that. I think your values, and they're listed there, are amazing. I actually was part of an adult forum at the religious community that I was at earlier this morning, and we were talking about your values. And I bring greetings from a group of about 12 adults who can feel very at home here, because those values are really worth embracing. They particularly like people are more important than beliefs. Many of us, and I include myself in this, have been hurt by religious groups that have said beliefs are more important than people. I really celebrate that value, that people are more important. That human hands solve human problems. Let's not wait around for some God to intervene, because we're not going to get some miraculous intervention. If we're going to eliminate racism, if we're going to eliminate and build bridges across things, it's going to be our work that's going to do that. Reality is known through reason. What a great, great value. Meaning comes from making a difference. I so appreciate the announcement about working at a women's shelter, the work that you're doing. We don't do good because we're going to be rewarded by some outside power, and we don't keep from doing evil because we're going to be beat up or condemned to hell by some outside power. We do good because we're human beings. We do good because we're human. I was working all last week with people that manage EMS systems, ambulance systems, pre-hospital care throughout the United States and Canada. And I heard a wonderful, their vision, their mantra for their company is that we are ladies and gentlemen providing services to ladies and gentlemen. It's a great mantra. Some of them complain about the frequent flyers. That's a term for people that call for an ambulance whenever they need a good meal and a little bit of tender, loving care at the hospital, so they call 911. But even when people have called over and over again, we are ladies and gentlemen giving services to ladies and gentlemen by accepting and being accepted in return. We need community. We need community. I need community. You need community, or you wouldn't be here. Community is what makes us human. Because of the time, I'm not going to actually have us stop and do this, but I would challenge each of you sometime, perhaps even in the visiting time afterwards, to ask somebody those 3 questions. Pick one of the values listed above and share a personal story about why that value is important to you. Every one of you has a story about one of those values. I wish I had the time to hear all of your stories. Second question, what do you value most about yourself? Amanda, I want to hear what you value most about yourself. And the third value, what do you value most about the Oasis community? Just a final summary, the 5 principles of appreciative inquiry are listed below. Appreciative inquiry actually, as I mentioned, kind of comes out of Native American traditions, but it was kind of rediscovered by some leaders, David Cooperrider being one of the main ones, at Case Reserve in Cleveland, Ohio. Anybody from Cleveland here? Or any connections? There's a university, and in their business school, they studied organizations. And one of the findings that they made was that organizations, any kind of organization, an organization like this, an organization like companies you work for, are living organisms, not machines. Now that may sound like a no-brainer. Of course they are. But we sometimes treat organizations more like machines. We need to treat organizations like living organisms. That means that these 5 principles are operative, and there's been a lot of research to show that it works. The constructionist principle. Our life is not predetermined by some outside force. It's not determined by the circumstances of our birth. It's not determined by what we did last week. We construct our lives by the imaginations of the community which surround us. We increase when we use the words of value to our organizations, when we tell the stories. We create where we're going. Number 2, the principle of simultaneity. Every time we ask a question, we're not only seeking information, more importantly, we're planting seeds of expectations. I oftentimes use the expression, what's new and good in your life? Because even people that have had a pretty tough week can tell me a story about something new and good in their life. I remember telling that to my aunt's aunt, who was always the most negative person I've ever known. And when I first said that to her, she looked at me like I just hit her between the eyes with a baseball bat. And then she stopped and she said, you know, David, I was supposed to host my bridge group this week, and I didn't feel very good. And I've got such nice friends. They called up and said, we'll help clean the house and we'll bring the food over if you still host the meeting. I've got some wonderful friends. And she kind of caught herself saying nice things. I tricked her. The mere act of asking questions will have an impact on an organization. Number 3, the poetic principle. Organizations are like a work of art, open to multiple interpretations. They can be a source of inspiration. KC Oasis can be a source of inspiration for all of us who believe that community is important and that we work together as communities. 4th is the anticipatory principle. I have a small bit of farmland in central Kansas, southern Saline County. And one year I talked my farmer who farms around to plant a field of sunflower seeds. Sometimes you've gone by big fields of sunflowers, and if you were to take the day and actually take a day off and plant yourself in the middle of the field, you would notice that when the sun comes up in the morning, all the sunflowers, when they get about 6 inches across, will be facing the rising sun. And although you can't really see the sunflowers move, they really do as the sun makes its journey across the sky. Now, reason tells us that the earth is spinning rather than the sun is walking across the sky, but we still talk about the sunrise and the sunset. And by evening, they're bowing their heads to the west to watch the sun set. That's called the heliotropic principle. Organisms are drawn to what they get their energy from. We are fed and we move in the direction of the stories we tell, of the questions we ask. We are living organisms. And finally, the positive principle. The more positive our stories we tell, the more positive the outcomes. Some research has been done at major teaching hospitals, including KU Medical Center, where they didn't follow the doctors and nurses who had direct patient contact. But all the other staff, the people that brought meals, cooked meals and brought them into the rooms, the custodians that changed the beds and swept the floors, people in the accounting department, the people who did all those other jobs that are necessary. And they discovered that if the ratio of positive interactions was higher than the ratio of negative interactions, that the healing of the patients were quicker and more complete. Let me say that another way. When we gathered before we came together, and when we began to visit around here, the more positive our interactions, the more our desired outcomes are going to come true. Appreciative inquiry is a way of thinking that can bring about the things in our organizations and in our life that will really fit our vision. I have a very brief rest of the story that I want to close with, but do we want to have, are there any questions or comments that I can respond to before I finish that story? Or should I just finish it because we're ready to move on to all that good food over here? Anybody have a question that you'd like for me to respond to? Well, let me tell you the rest of the story. Saturday morning came, and Marvin and his father drove up to the law center in town, and they got out of the car, and Marvin saw about half a block away his friend Lincoln. And much to his father's dismay, Marvin took off running and hugged Lincoln. And Lincoln said, I have written an apology, and I want to turn this in. And Marvin read it, and he said, could I sign it too? And Marvin signed it as well. The two boys, Marvin's father and Lincoln's mother, walked into the county attorney's office. They sat down. The county attorney was a very wise attorney. He knew Marvin's father very well. And he said to the four, I really don't want to press charges against these two boys, but I'm going to have to ask you to do something. And he says, I'm going to give you 24 hours, and if you can come to me with a proposal for some type of community service that could make a difference in this community, and I approve it, and it's carried out, we will not have any charges to go on Marvin and Lincoln's record at all. Nothing will ever be filed. At first, Marvin's father was very upset, and he said, I want to have the boys seen separately. And the county attorney said, I'm sorry, no, that won't happen. And so the four of them, Marvin's father kind of reluctantly walked over to a coffee shop and sat down. And they began the process of exploring a community project. They actually asked for an extension, which the county attorney allowed them. But within about a week, they came up with a proposal. And they decided that they would try to build in the city park a round kiva-type facility where people could have conversations. And they would have built in to the cement the symbols of the different cultures that were there. In this particular town, there was, of course, some very early settlers who were Swedish. There were quite a few Native Americans, both Lakota and Cheyenne. There were quite a few Hispanics. There were some undocumented people from Mexico. There were some people from some of the Eastern European communities that had come into town for jobs. And they built these symbols into this round, not a building, but kind of a wall where they had conversation. They did not use the term vital conversations. That's the term that I use for the group that I facilitate once a month in North Canada, in Gladstone. But I think they lived out of what the vital conversation is. A vital conversation, the purpose of a vital conversation is not to win an argument, but to win a friend and to advance civilization. The purpose of a vital conversation is not to win an argument, but to win a friend and to advance civilization. And if you would visit that town today, you would find that there are scheduled activities in this conversation pit. There's also kind of a habit that a lot of people, when they meet with a friend, especially if it's a friend who is different than they are, let's go over to the kiva because it's a safe space. You are creating a safe space like that here, and I'm appreciative of that. Bible conversations where the purpose is not to win an argument, but to win a friend. When the project, they actually got the local Home Depot and several companies to contribute to this. They got over 100 people who in some way participated in building this kiva and in supporting it, and they got many people involved. About 6 months later, who do you think changed the most through that process? Marvin's dad. Marvin's dad was transformed. Instead of the racist language that he had spewed most of his life, he became an advocate. He hired a number of Lakota to work for him and to work in the community. People change when we pay attention to what works and what's right. I thank you for allowing me to tell a few stories and to be with you this morning, and I'm grateful for what you're creating here, creating a community where people are more important than beliefs. Thank you very much.